Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Chasing Trees podcast with Charlie and Justin. We are on episode 100. We made it to triple digits.
Wow.
And we actually, I don't know if we mentioned this before. You and I talked about doing something not like a grand, big production, but doing something a little bit different for episode 100. And then we put it on hiatus to 104.
Yeah.
Because that would be the 2-year mark.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me, too.
So, here we are. We made it. We've talked about it for quite a while now, several episodes.
Yeah.
Probably once we got upwards of 75. Episode 75 is when we started looking for triple digits. And we've done it every week for 100 straight weeks.
100 weeks.
Which is pretty cool.
Think about 100 weeks and then everything that's happened inside 100 weeks.
Yeah. So,
right.
Not only from a personal perspective, but from a global perspective.
Yeah.
With the pandemic and everything.
Right.
And it's pretty cool just because, and I know we've talked about this before, not that recording a podcast is that difficult or requires an extreme amount of planning, but it's pretty cool to know that we've done that every week the same day.
Yeah.
Every week for 100 straight weeks.
Yeah, that's
it's very difficult to do anything consistently for 100 straight weeks just because of random circumstance of life. But knock on wood, hopefully it continues. But we've done it so far, so
consistency is key, right?
It's almost like it's funny because sometimes when it comes to doing this, I've always speculated on if it would be a little bit better at times to miss an episode, just so because I feel like it sounds crazy, but I almost have anxiety about getting it uploaded and making sure nothing happens in the time that we record, just because we had one little slip where I had a Wi-Fi issue trying to upload it, and it ended up being, I think, past midnight by the time it finally uploaded, because we had some continuous issues that I could not troubleshoot for the life of me. But regardless, we ended up getting it uploaded, and that was that. But I was frustrated the one time when I was uploading it, just because it came up and it was showing that we were uploading them on Sunday.
Yeah, and I remember that.
I think it's because the time zone of whatever Libsyn, which is the database or whatever you'd call it that we upload with, or upload to, it must have a different time zone listed. So when you upload later on a Saturday night, wherever the time zone is registered as Sunday. But regardless, we've had one every weekend, every Saturday for 100 straight weeks, which is a pretty good accomplishment for us.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
So how are things on your end? Training-wise, life-wise, job-wise, all that stuff?
Good. Some stuff on the horizon here that is going to make some changes.
Good.
But, yeah, everything's good, man. Baby's getting bigger. The grass keeps growing.
Yeah.
And, my coach keeps giving me crazy workouts, so everything is awesome.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the app that we talked about last week is very convenient because you have everything hooked up to it, so it lets me see it and update it in real time. And I don't know, I think that constantly, we always talk about it, about finding ways to streamline stuff, finding ways to be more efficient. Heck, that was my whole New Year's resolution that we talked about last episode as well. And additionally, we talked about it on New Year's and a few episodes throughout the year. Periodically, was just being more efficient at what you do. And so I feel sometimes, and that was a good example of that. Sometimes we can take online coaching or nutrition coaching. What's typical is doing everything via email, updates and everything goes through email. Well, one thing that I've had a lot of success through now is the app, the Trainerize app that I've been using. And I feel sometimes we get into, and this is kind of an analogy for life, sometimes you get so comfortable doing what you're doing that you don't make any progress because this is sufficient for you.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you're constantly stressing about doing things differently, because sometimes you need consistency because you're going to master it, the communication. If it's through email, you're going to master that communication and master your time management if you're used to doing that. But I don't think that means you should never explore options to try to do things a little bit faster or update people a little bit more timely or whatever.
Right.
So it's weird when you think about that. You're never done getting better at anything, or you shouldn't be.
Exactly. And if you are, you're you're just done.
Yeah. Because I mean, we've talked about it before, how there's no such thing as staying the same.
Right.
You're either getting better or you're getting worse. And even if you don't think that you're getting worse by whatever metric you're using, you're also getting older.
Right.
So therefore,
you're getting worse.
Time's ticking. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So training's going good on my end. I'm following a little bit. I updated my programming a little bit to try to focus on strength a couple times a week. So what I did was I set like kind of like a 4-week strength loading phase where I'm doing 3 movements per session, all heavy compound movements. Most of them are with a barbell, a few with a dumbbell. And after that strength loading phase, I'm going to kind of assess where I'm at after 4 weeks and then go from there. So the next goal, or the goal for the next month, is to try to get as strong as possible. Now, I'm not like short-minded. I know that I'm not going to accumulate that much strength within a 4-week period.
Right.
But now I'm also sprinkling what I would consider normal workouts in there too, because my goal was to do this 3-day split: workout 1, workout 2, workout 3, and then repeat it. But what's happening is some of my movement patterns overlap, and it's causing me to have a difficult time recovering. So like my push day, let's say that that's separate, right?
Yeah.
Because the pull and the lower body are the two where you have like exercises that overlap as far as like body parts used, especially because, like I told you, they're all heavy compound movements. So my pull day are rack pulls from a lower pin, so essentially a deadlift variation, pull-ups, and bent over dumbbell rows with standing with 2 bilateral. So dumbbells in each hand doing bent over dumbbell rows. So those are my 3 movements. The main one that was causing me issues, and I don't want to say issues like it's a bad thing, but the one thing that digs the recovery hole deep is obviously doing 5 sets of 5 on a very, very heavy rack pull.
Right.
So then my lower body day is 5x5 on trap bar deadlifts, 5x5 on barbell squats, and then 3x12 on a leg press movement. Now those are all working sets.
Yes.
So like
There's
I'm doing
multiple
5
sets
heavy
leading up to
sets.
them.
Yeah. So realistically, you're looking at probably 10 sets by the time I get warm-ups in and progressively upregulate my load to the point where I'm ready to do my first heavy set.
Right.
So that's a lot. So if I do push, pull, legs, I have legs right after pull. But even since it's only a 3-day split, if I put my push day in between the pull and the legs, after the legs, you hit pull again.
Right.
So when you have 3 workouts, you're not able to get the 2 that you want away from each other. You can't get them away from each other.
Yeah, because you're going to go right back to it.
It's like a triangle. 2 angles are always going to be adjacent or next to each other, no matter what. So what I'm doing is I'm doing those 3, and then if I need either a day off or a day of accessory work, I'm doing that. Like you and I, after this, we're going to train arms. So that's not something that I program in. It's not something that I log. But in essence, I don't want to use this term because we train everything really hard. But like this is going to be active recovery.
Right.
Because it's probably going to be a little bit higher rep. It's not going to crush my nervous system at all. It's not going to dig the recovery hole deeper like doing a 5x5 on squats and deadlifts and leg press would be.
Right.
Or whatever.
Exactly.
So that's where I'm at with my training. It's been so long since I've focused on strength that I really feel like it's necessary for me, because I always think back to like the drawing board in the sense of not just a clean drawing board, but like past drawing boards.
Yeah.
Like, what have I done in the past that's worked? What have I done in the past that hasn't worked? And it's funny because when you talk about that constant evolving and trying to get better, I do that all the time with like training.
Yeah,
and nutrition.
You talk every time we talk about my diet. You talk about, let's go back to the drawing board. What did we do before that worked?
And it's weird because I haven't done that with myself enough.
Yeah,
because I'm constantly trying to experiment. And one thing that I do too, and I think most good coaches do this, is I'm not trying to make myself like a martyr here, but I'll limit my own progress for the sake of experimenting for other people. So like I want to experiment to see, well, I don't know. Let's see if my body can handle this. Or what if I only train 3 days a week and I took my frequency and volume way down? Would my recovery be better? Would it make me better? So I do things kind of experimentally to see if it works for other people or works on other people. Now, now there's the caveat though, just because it works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you or whoever. But I still do it nonetheless. And so I'm constantly trying to like try new things and evolve my training. And like I need to stop doing that and do like I do with my clients and go back and say, okay, when was I making the most amount of progress? So ultimately, when I look back on things, I can pretty much definitively say, and there's nuance here, like it's not the only thing that I focus on. But when I was focusing on being the strongest, that's actually when my body responded the best and I was the biggest. Now there are certain body parts I think that respond a little bit better to higher rep or medium rep range or whatever. But I
As a
think that
whole.
yeah, as a whole, I was the best when I was the strongest. So then you sit there and think, okay, well, why would I not continuously try to get stronger then?
I think strength is the. I think most people come back to strength more often than they like to admit.
Yeah,
Because realistically, that's the goal, right? I mean, we want to look good, but we lift heavy weights, pick big things up, and put them down because we want to be strong.
yeah, and I think that,
And
and I've talked about that before too with people that like my main goal is to look better and be
right,
healthier, and strength is pretty far down the list of things that I
right,
want.
but it's like the vessel to get there.
But it's still on the list.
Yeah,
So people will say, "Oh, I don't care about how strong I am. I just want to look big," because hypertrophy training and strength training, a little bit different type of animal. But I feel like people are kidding themselves if they say I don't want to be strong
yeah,
or I don't care at all. Like if I'm going to be big, I'd rather be big and strong than big and weak.
yeah,
So I do enjoy the strength training component. And like I think that when you talk about strength training, it's important to put it in perspective of what it means because I think that when people and I was guilty of this when I was younger or less experienced that when you think about strength training, you think absolute strength, so as heavy as possible.
right.
Which like that's not what it means. Like I'm not going to throw as much weight as I can on a bar, do it and call that strength training. There are certain variables that I keep in place. So my technique, my intention, so what muscle I'm squeezing and challenging the muscle. So I'm still using the best form that I can, still going through all my cues. Like when I'm doing a rack pull or a deadlift, I don't just walk up to the bar, grab it, and pull it off the ground. I mean, I know that fundamentally speaking and primitively speaking,
Right.
that's what a deadlift is.
Yeah.
Like you literally just go over, pick it up, and set it down. But I still like go through almost like a checklist, so to speak. So like, okay, I step up to the bar, I get my feet grounded, spread my toes, make sure my arch is stable. So like because training barefoot, like I do a lot of like groundwork, so to speak. And then I'll bend down, make sure my grip is good, depress my shoulders, core tight, shoulders back. Like I go through kind of like, and it's not like I'm cognizant of it. I mean, because I don't necessarily think about, okay,
Each step.
yeah, I'm setting up for the deadlift. What do? I just do it.
Yeah.
But I still go through and like core bracing and everything. So I make sure that the deadlift is the same technique, whether it's 100 pounds or 500 pounds. It's going to be the same.
I think that's speaks a lot to why you don't get like injuries lifting heavy weight.
Yeah.
Versus people like me who often, more often than not more often than not, but a lot more often than you, I hurt myself with a lighter load than what you're lifting because a lot of times my form gets sacrificed.
Well, I know people that have, it's actually funny. I'm not going to say most or all, because I don't want to throw like any type of superlatives out there, but like a lot of people that I know, and I see this happen all the time, that have injuries, and I'm talking big injuries. I'm not talking like a little hamstring tweak. I'm talking full pec tear or pec rupture or bicep rupture or something like that. Obviously, a large number of them do it when they're training their heaviest because the body can't handle load. But I've known so many people that have hurt themselves on weights that they would consider warm up. Now, there's a couple things to consider there. Number one is maybe that was just the last straw.
Yeah.
Maybe something was hanging on by a thread and that just happened to be enough time to let whatever snap or get injured or whatever. But I also think that a lot of times people's technique breaks down when they're lighter. Like when I go for my heaviest set, I'm very, very focused. Well, I have this bad habit sometimes, and everybody does, where you go up to a bar that's light and it's not your 1 rep max or it's not close to your working set. So you don't treat the rep.
You don't go through the cues.
Exactly.
Setup.
And so I think that if you don't go through this setup, then you're leaving yourself susceptible to injury because biomechanically you're not doing the lift correctly.
Right.
And I think that is, I would just guess that's probably what happens a lot, or what accounts for people getting hurt at a lighter weight than you would think that they should.
I have to agree. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense because, like, I see it happening to me, and like you said, not severe injuries, but like, you know, just tweaked back or you know, a tweaked pec, like you said. And it's always whenever I'm doing the lower sets, and it starts to, like, I feel it in the top sets.
One thing that I feel like helps me is the fact that I also I'm trying to think how I word this. I try to let my ego be set aside for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I don't mind going lighter when it's necessary. Like, I don't think, again, strength training isn't just about raw, absolute strength. I mean, it is, but there's context. Also, when it comes to taking days off, I know people that preach hard work, effort all the time, which obviously we do as well.
Yeah.
But I know when the work necessary, is to pump the brakes a little bit. So I have no shame taking a day off when my body needs it. It doesn't make me mentally weak. It doesn't make me not dedicated. It makes me intelligent. And I think I've said that before on the podcast when you do those types of things. Mm-hmm. So for me, I just think I don't really have an ego with things. So when it comes to training, I can take time off. I can go light and not think about, like, oh, are people going to perceive me as less of a hard worker because of that? You know, it's just that doesn't faze me. So I think that factors into to not getting hurt. Plus, I'm self-aware of not getting hurt. So, like, I do everything I can to prevent it. Like, thorough warm, because again, the majority of what I work with is athlete population, where guys like you and I, if we get hurt, it's frustrating, but it doesn't affect our career path,
right,
or our immediate future. Whereas with our kids, the athletes that I train, like, if they get hurt, that is the difference right there.
The difference.
So I'm very, very cognizant of training them for functionality and training them for injury prevention as much as humanly possible. So then I myself am around that, and I adopt that kind of mentality. So I try to put it into play with my own stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say that probably inadvertently bleeds over into, like, your lifestyle clients.
It does. You know, it does, absolutely.
That's a good thing because regardless, even if like injury isn't going to prevent us from doing the thing that we do, you know, it's not going to ruin our career. We do have working careers.
Yes.
That we have to think about, you know, and sometimes I'm guilty of, you know, putting myself in a bad spot and trying to go too heavy or trying to push harder than I should. And then I pay for it the rest of the week at work. You know? So it's like, I get that. I get it a lot.
Yeah, I think that's for sure something that you can concern yourself with. And I mean, you're never ever going to be able to make any progress physically if you're hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
And then plus, like, where would you be mentally?
Worse.
So, like, this doesn't affect, like, just for me, I just think about how much I put into this, not only from an effort perspective, but from an enjoyment perspective. Like, how much I enjoy working out.
Right.
And plus, with me, with the exception of teaching, everything I do is based around human performance, exercise, health, all that stuff.
Right.
Like with my online clients and my in-person clients, and I like to lead by example, and I can't lead by example if I'm doing stupid stuff and hurting myself too.
I agree.
So I think those are just all things that you have to consider as you go through it. And like you said, I mean, up until this point, knock on wood, I felt like I've done a pretty good job of being mindful of my training and not putting myself into disadvantageous positions because you can't control it completely.
Right.
Like, injuries are going to happen to everybody, and I've got hurt before, but, like, you just have to put yourself into smarter situations and give yourself a better chance or better odds of injuries not kind of falling upon you.
Right.
Just by being smart, I guess, is what it boils down to.
Sounds like a good spot to go to a commercial break.
I think so. And after we come back from the break, one of the things that I wanted to touch on at some point, and what better time to do it than episode 100, is kind of like reflect. And then, kind of like we talked about with our training, look back at the drawing board of the past 100 episodes, plan for the future and kind of go over things on the next steps we want to take and where we want to go with this thing now that we're at 100. So
sounds like a good idea.
Let's go to a commercial break, and we'll talk more about all that stuff when we come back. As listeners of the Chasing Dreams podcast, we know that you demand the highest quality at all times. If you're interested in quality, look no further than Beast Mode Baking. Beast Mode Baking aims to bring the highest quality, creative, and of course delicious baked goods to your home with nationwide shipping. All orders need to be pre-ordered to ensure they're packed fresh and shipped out to you as soon as possible. Beast Mode Baking offers a flat rate of $15 for shipping due to the size and weight of the cookies and doughs. So if you're interested in Beast Mode Baking, please contact CEO Shannon Knorr. That's at SKNORR13 on Instagram and order your delicious baked goods today, because every time you support them, you're supporting the podcast as well. And we're back from our commercial break. Okay, so prior to the break, we talked about a little bit about being reflective in like our training and our nutrition and all that stuff, and I think that we need to do the same for the podcast, considering we're on episode 100.
Yeah.
So like I look back, and I don't know, man, honestly, I don't know if it's just because of the chaotic schedule, but one thing, we haven't had guests on in a while.
I agree.
And I think that one of the things that when I look back, and because I actually have analytics to prove this and data to prove this, that our listeners and our downloads were the highest whenever we would have guests on.
Yeah.
So I feel like, I mean, when we went from a couple dozen downloads per episode, and then we were getting hundreds per download once we first initially started putting guests out there, because not only is our following listening, but now their following is listening as well. So I'd love to get guests on. And plus, not only from a downloads and it's not just about the numbers game. I feel like
back to the quality that we wanted to provide.
Yeah, it's more impactful because you and I can only give so much knowledge and give so much insight.
Right.
And people, that's the other thing is like people, well, I'm assuming there may be a couple, a very, very, very small portion, but most people don't listen to the podcast just for our updates. They listen to it for entertainment, or they listen to it for self-help, or they listen to it to find motivation. And I feel like you and I can only provide so much of that. Whereas the guests that we've had on, we've had a really good track record of having awesome guests over the years. And year and almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years, yeah.
That we can, that we should be going back to that.
I agree.
I think, for sure.
I don't know about you, but I know I have a few people lined up that are ready to pull the trigger whenever.
Yes, as do I.
So I know we have it on deck. I think I don't know about, like, there again, I don't know about you, but I know that, like, it is probably a comfort thing. Like, when we don't do guests, we can do super early in the morning. We can, you know what I mean? So
yeah, and that's why I'm saying it's scheduling based. Not that you create an excuse, but like you and I both like getting up and getting the podcast done at 4 a.m, 5 a.m, late today. Like we started at 6 a.m, whereas most people, and it's almost like, I think it's rude or disrespectful to ask a guest to do the show where they're taking time out of their day to help us. We ask them to do this, and then we say, oh yeah, but can you do it at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever?
Yeah.
So you and I now have a little bit of, we've gotten to the point where on Saturdays specifically, we've provided ourselves with sufficient space.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like we have like wiggle room, like it's just happened by chance that we can probably fit it in here. I mean, we allocate certain times of the day and we can do things in the morning to leave the evening open, or vice versa. So that's one thing that we'll definitely have to start doing or revisit, is having guests on.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I have people all the time that ask, when is so-and-so going to be back on? Are you going to have any more guests? And again, it's not an excuse, it's the reality, and I'm taking full responsibility for this. You're so busy throughout the week that you don't actually sit and plan,
right?
Okay, what are we going to do for the podcast? Because like this morning, you and I, like every morning for the past, oh gosh, almost probably 50 plus episodes,
yeah.
We just sit down and just go.
Yeah, just hit record.
So maybe you and I need to take a little bit more of a planning approach to this.
Yeah.
Do you have any other things that you'd like to do going forward aside from, I mean, I know there's more, but that was just kind of the initial one that came to my mind and has been on my mind for several episodes now, is getting guests on. So is there anything else that like resonates with you, is something that you feel that we should be doing, or that, and maybe we can even extend the, before you answer, maybe we can even extend the question, or pose the question to the guests too.
Right.
Like if there's anything that they think would be cool.
Yeah, what do you want to see? You know what I mean? Like ultimately, it's cool whatever Charlie and I want to do, right?
Yeah.
But what does the listeners want to see, hear? What do they want us to talk about? Do you want a video? Do you want, is there things that you want from the Chasing Dreams podcast that is going to improve the quality of your dedication to us?
Yeah, for sure. Because after 100 episodes, and it's like any podcast really, or most podcasts outside of Joe Rogan and a few others, after 100 episodes, things can get stale.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to just, again, let's go back to the drawing board. And then not only that, but like, what new things can we do? What new people can we reach out to? Because anytime, like I always get, whenever I put questions out on social media relative to, or relating to the podcast, I always get a ton of feedback. Like I get some funny feedback, and I get people that want us to interview people that are outside of our reachability, which is cool because, we'll eventually get there. But I do get very, very useful and very, very valuable responses from people when I do that. Like they'll give me really good suggestions of people that I think, oh, that's maybe someone that we should get on the show, or could get on the show. And then I think that when you do that with consistency, then you allow yourself to be a little bit more, almost like attractive. Like you get a little bit more attractive to having guests on that are of a higher quality.
Yeah.
Because like I feel we want guests on, but guests should want to come on our show as well, especially if it's like a bigger name.
Right.
It's almost like you feel not guilty, but you feel a little bit wary about asking someone who would be above the podcast, so to speak. Someone who's done bigger podcasts, someone who has a much greater following. And that's why we've talked about it on episodes prior, and I think probably now is a good time to revisit it, when I talked to Aaron Singerman and asked him for suggestions. Right. So Aaron Singerman, for those that aren't familiar with him, he's the CEO of a multi-million-dollar supplement company, Redcon One, which over the past probably several years has taken the fitness industry by storm, and is
absolutely.
I don't have the numbers to go off of, but if you're talking popularity, sales, revenue, I mean, it has to be near the top of in the world.
I agree.
And I talked to Aaron because I have a friendly relationship with him, and I asked him, I said, listen, because he has a podcasting history as well, and I told him that I have this podcast. I explained it to him. I said, we eventually want to get to the point where we have more guests and bigger guests, like reach out to people that are, for lack of a better term, famous.
Yeah.
What do we need to do on our end to not to approach those people, like to not be embarrassed or nervous about approaching them? Like, hey, we have this little tiny podcast that we do locally, but we want to shoot for the stars. Like, how do we come at them with the sense of accomplishment that allows them to look at this and say, yeah, that's fine. This looks, quote, good enough for me.
Right.
And one of the things he talked about was professionalism, naturally. And he said it needs to look, feel, and sound professional. Like, don't just, start recording. Like now, little things go a long way, like commercials and intro songs and quality editing. That's going to allow someone to say, yeah, maybe I do want to be on that. That seems like it's not gimmicky, and that seems like these guys take it seriously. And the other thing that he told me about, which is always important, he said, do your homework on people. Like when you
know stuff about them, right?
Yeah, which I feel like you and I do that organically anyway, because that's how we determine the guests we want. Yeah. We don't just look for who has the most following on Instagram and then pick those people. Like the guests that we've had on in the past, we want them because we know what their background is and we want them to share it.
Right.
So I think that that's something that we need to do going forward, is not only get more guests, but then also kind of expand our horizons as far as like reaching for people with a little bit more notoriety. And I think that that's one of the things that will help us grow. It's not just because of quality. Just because someone has 1 million followers on Instagram doesn't make their messages any more qualified or any better than the ones we've had previously. Because every single person that we've had on, whether it's a big name, little name, or no name, has been extremely, extremely helpful, I feel, to like engendering the theme of the podcast and providing a little bit more insight to people on what we're all about. Because you and I can talk about what we're all about, but then when they have other people preaching that message, it's a little bit more impactful. So I think that when you talk about getting these higher profile guests on, one of the things that does is just increase our outreach.
Yeah, it opens the doors for everybody else.
You can look at that as like selfish, but I don't think it's selfish at all. I think it's the opposite. We are trying to build this to reach more people.
Mm-hmm.
And if we kind of stay in our little microcosm, and it's like the old saying, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got.
Right.
So if we continue to do what we're doing, we'll reach, hundreds, thousands of people, whatever, but we're not expanding it to tens of thousands of people, or 20,000 or 80,000 or 100,000 or whatever.
Yeah. We ain't getting nothing on the West Coast.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's a way that we can kind of build this a little bit better. But before we keep going, I feel like naturally the conversation kind of skipped over your input, because I asked you for your input, and I said then we could do listener input, and then completely got sidetracked, and I apologize for that.
It's all good, man. It's all
so
good.
Do you have anything, like, is this something that you've been mulling over as we've approached episode 100?
A lot. I've been thinking about guests a lot, because that's what basically in my opinion, and what we sat down and talked about in the beginning was, it's cool for you and I to talk all the time, but we want to bring as much value to people, and I think the more episodes that we do, just you and I, it could get, I think you said earlier, stale.
And plus, how much value can you and I actually bring?
Right, exactly.
I'm not saying that we don't bring value, but for 100 straight weeks, the value that we bring is the same. It's kind of monotonous.
Yeah, we got to keep adding somebody in. So I'm like, where my head's been with it is I'm not even opposed to revisiting our guests that we've already had.
Yeah.
Because they all of them have the ability to talk about another topic, a different thing that they've done, the way the coronavirus has affected their life, the way they handle their training when the gyms were closed down for people like Shannon in New York.
Mm-hmm.
It's so, like, there's so much that we can talk about that with each of them, because they've all been such good quality.
Yeah.
How's their life changed over the last 100 weeks? You know what I mean? And so, like, on top of that, they had, some of them had stuff that we just didn't have time to get to.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it would just do them a more of a justice, do the listeners more of a justice to revisit these people. And I'm not saying just do the same guys and girls again, but we could go and do an episode 2 with Shannon, an episode 2 with Dr. Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I think that that's something that we'll have to do, is start reaching out to people. And I know that we had reached out to people, and we kind of had like a soft schedule, so to speak. Like, hey, I should be available during this month. And then the conversation leads to, okay, well, we'll reach out, we'll touch base, we'll stay in touch, whatever. And then by lack of responsibility and lack of professionalism on my part with the people that I've contacted, I haven't solidified anything. So I've talked to people and got some hard inquiries, so to speak, where people are like, yeah, I think I would want to do this. Can you tell me more about the podcast? Sure, this is what we stand for. These are our 3 pillars that we try to accomplish with this, etc. And then everything's good to go except for penciling it in.
Right.
And then, because one of the things is when you have a guest or I have a guest, we have to convey that to the other person.
Yeah.
Like, hey, Justin, so-and-so wants to come on. He's available these days. Is your schedule able to accommodate that? Because when I'm talking to a guest or you're talking to a guest, we can only give them our specific schedule and not the other person's.
Right.
So that's something that we'll definitely do moving forward. And I would also like to kind of maybe make the podcast bigger than a podcast if possible. So, like, I don't really know specifics because I haven't really brainstormed about how I want to do it. But just even if we can brand it and market and continue to market it, just doing volunteer work or anything that we can, anything positive in the community that we can put our name behind or sponsor something or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. You know how I feel about it. It's community outreach to me is of the highest of importance,
Yeah.
and that's something that I do. I try to do as regular as possible. Is you know do things that are not just beneficial to me.
Yes. Yes. And
So
then I think that I don't want to change paces too quickly here, but speaking of outreach and sponsoring events, we also allow the opportunity for people to sponsor the podcast too.
right,
So as of right now, we have our primary sponsor, Beast Mode Baking, as you guys heard earlier in the episode with the commercial read. But we are also always open to people who want, and that's the other thing is when if you have a message or you have a product that we can help promote, you can contact Justin and I, and we can look and see if we're a good fit. Because realistically, we're not going to promote anything we don't believe in.
yeah,
So it's not like we're just going to accept a sponsorship from anybody. We want to make sure that it's a mutual agreement as far as quality and the message that it portrays. But we have commercial spots obviously available, and that's something that we have put out there. Haven't had many people take the bait, but I'm also more than willing to sit down with anybody who's interested in that and go over the numbers
yep,
as far as downloads and episodes goes, just so they understand what the outreach they're getting is,
mm-hmm.
and then possibly do maybe incentive-based sponsorships where the more people we reach, the more kickback we get from those sponsorships. So that's just something that we can look for in the future too. Not that it directly affects the listeners necessarily, but something that we can help grow the podcast, create more of an outreach. And really, if you think about it, man, the more we grow, the better quality we can provide.
Absolutely.
So the people help us grow by listening, commenting, sharing, all that stuff, because the more our podcast grows, the higher fruit we're able to reach. That you could think of it that way. So like if we want to get super high profile guests on and do things on a grander scale, we're going to need some help doing that, because we can grow this as much as we're capable of, but really we're not the ones growing it. It's the people that listen.
Yeah, it's
so
if
you're listening to this episode, Justin and I would greatly appreciate it, even if it's, I mean, it only takes 60 seconds, 2 minutes out of your day to share the podcast, post about it, tag us in it, do something that helps kind of elicit a little bit of an uptick in the algorithm on social media, just so we get a little bit of traction, or I shouldn't say get a little bit of traction, but continue to have the traction that we've had, because we're beyond grateful for everybody that's listened and the thousands of downloads that we've had, but we also want to continue to expand that a little bit. Absolutely. And I know that we've had gone through periods where you and I say, well, you know, this is what we got to do. Let's make sure we do this. But then you and I are so busy and get pulled in so many directions, which if this podcast has reached its peak and we're okay with that, then we're okay with that. But I think that you and I both aren't okay with being satisfied or anything. We're very happy with how far it's come. And realistically, on my end, it's further than I ever thought that it would be.
I agree.
But there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
And you're never satisfied. Yeah.
You know, the sky is the limit. So I think that we slam it into high gear and see where it goes.
Sure.
You know?
And I think that that's kind of a good actionable step to give people. How we like to end our podcast lately is giving people things that they can do, actions that they can take. So with you and I, we started off the episode just by nature of when we started talking, discussing training, and we talked about going back to the drawing board and seeing what works and what doesn't. And then in the second half of the episode, after our commercial break, you and I kind of transferred that over to the podcast. What has been working? What hasn't? What do we need to go back to? What do we need to try new? Just being very, very self-assessing. Yep. So maybe that can be a little bit of a challenge to the listeners this week, is to be self-assessing with what you do. Are you going through and doing all the same things? And maybe you're working your tail off, and maybe you're in a position where you're doing all this stuff and you're not really getting better. Maybe you're working so much and you're not making more money, or you're not getting stronger, or you're not getting faster, or you're trying to spend more time with your family and it's not working. We'll kind of reassess.
Yeah, look at it from a different angle.
Sometimes working harder isn't always the answer. Yeah. It's part of the answer, but sometimes you got to do things a little bit differently, work a little bit smarter, be a little bit more objective with how you look at things and how you view things. So that's the challenge to the listeners this week, is make sure you give yourself a time period throughout the week to self-reflect, go back to the proverbial drawing board and see if you can make any changes to help kind of put yourself in a better position moving forward.
Absolutely.
All right, so with that, we have come to the end of another episode of the Chasing Dreams podcast with Charlie and Justin. This has been episode 100. We appreciate you guys so much, are so thankful and so blessed to have you join us on this century episode, and we look forward to giving you so much more content and greater value in the future, and we will speak to you guys next week. Unbreakable, unstoppable, I'm pushed to